might change the shot a little bit halfway through so you get a closer shot.
Okay.
But you can just look at me, you don't have to look at the camera or anything.
Should I sit more properly?
You're fine. No, just relax.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This is great to be able to interview you. If you want to start out, so just in general, because I might edit the film out so that you don't hear my voice, if you could just say whatever question I ask you back in your answer. So if I'm like, what'd you have for breakfast? You can say, oh, for breakfast this morning
Okay.
I had, so that in case I want to take out the questions, we know
Sure.
what you're talking about. So you can, if you wouldn't mind starting and saying your name and your age and when and where you were incarcerated.
My name is Antonio Rivera. I'm 25 years old, and I was incarcerated in several different facilities in Connecticut. Walker CI, McDougal CI, Cheshire CI, a few places. Because I have a lengthy sentence, I was given 12 years, so I was transferred multiple times, but I've been in multiple prisons, so.
And what is the highest level of education you reached before prison?
Before prison, I graduated high school.
And what did you think of school then when you were in high school or before you went to prison? And what did you think the purpose of school was at that time?
To be honest, before prison, school was just somewhat of a formality. You know, it's just something you do. It's not something that I really put a lot of thought into. I've always was a good student in high school. Few behavior issues, of course, just from going through, you know, regular just growing up. But I've always taken school seriously despite being somewhat of a disruptive student.
And if you feel comfortable sharing, what do you think were the main factors that led to your incarceration, and do you think that your school or your educational experience had any influence in that?
Well, I feel that me personally, I'm different than a lot of other guys from who come from my community. It's my persistence that allowed me to finish high school despite facing like several serious charges. I had a lot of things to really deviate me away from finishing school, but I was very persistent with finishing school. So I think it's a personal thing. You have to take education serious, even though being incarcerated, prison can allow you the time to get back into teaching yourself or self-education or looking towards getting back into school. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. So would you say that out of most of your friends, a lot of them did not finish high school or didn't really like enjoy school that much?
I think school was always like some place you can enjoy. What I just want to emphasize is on how serious you take finishing and completing school. So there were some people who went to school, but they didn't complete it, you know. And there were a lot of people I grew up with who have went on to be successful and live somewhat of a positive life, you know. But there's a lot of other people who just really didn't stay persistent with finishing school because it was a challenge for a lot of people who just had dysfunctional family backgrounds.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean that in any kind of judgmental way. I think there are a lot of things that get in the way of finishing school. I was just curious what kind of school experience you and kind of your friends had. And what was your experience of prison like before you got involved with any type of programming? Like, could you describe sort of your average day? It's probably difficult to.
Okay. An average day in prison prior to getting into CPE or just, well, I have a really serious passion for learning. I love learning. So I really read a lot of books, you know, constantly reading. I mean, just reading, a lot of reading. And basically my focus was always application. So I read specific material, books on real estate, business. Then I jumped into other material. So My prison experience prior to that was just more so just a lot of self-education. Particularly, I spent a lot of time learning some of the law to challenge, technicalities in my own cases. So it was always just me looking towards teaching myself something, even though I wasn't presented with opportunities to actually go to school. But day-to-day prison is really being alone with yourself and your thoughts. So that's very challenging to actually have to deal with your own thoughts. And I chose books as a form of escapism away from my own thoughts.
Yeah. And do you think that's standard for like most people's experience in prison? Do you think it was rare and you were kind of just pursuing your own self-education, but a lot of people around you were not doing that? Or do you think a lot of people in prison have the opportunity to reflect and really continue their learning?
I believe there are a lot of people who take that route of self-education in prison. But me, myself, I did feel at the time that I was unique, more so because of my age and because it was my first time incarcerated. Usually guys who go through the system multiple times, or particularly a first time, they don't really take education as a factor into completing their sentence. So I felt like, in my mind, I took a situation that was obviously bad and negative and tried to make the best out of it. In particular, I felt that being in prison, that society was going to leave me in the past. So what I wanted to do was learn as much information as possible so that society would have to catch up with me. Because people that are free are technically, speaking, they're not always reading or paying attention because there's more distractions in society. So this gave me time to pay attention to things that maybe people in society weren't paying attention to.
Yeah, definitely. So what kinds of educational opportunities and programs were available to you in prison, and how did you get involved with them? And then specifically, how did you find out about CPE and want to do that?
Well, I took just basic programming, and that's just an interesting word myself, just to think of programming, because like television programming, institutional programming, I'm more or less a nonconformist when it comes to programming. So I took the programs that were offered, and to be honest, I didn't feel that the prison programming was very helpful as far as application into the real world. So there were opportunities. I'm not going to say that Connecticut prison system definitely provides various opportunities for vocational courses and stuff. And I looked in different areas. And how I came in contact with CPE was just, I seen the notice, just signed up, but the confidence was always there. I didn't have one doubt in my mind that I was if I was gonna be accepted into the Wesleyan CPE program.
And what would you say is the purpose of the Center for Prison Education, or the main goals of the program in general?
The main goals, from my understanding, are to provide education, particularly higher education, college course material for prisoners who don't have access to this type of resource in prison or in society. So it's the goal of CPE is basically to provide opportunities for education for guys that are incarcerated and who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So the main purpose is educating people who lack access to higher education.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say to people who don't have access in prison or in society. Do you think that you had plans or visions of going to college before you were incarcerated? Was that something you hoped to do anyway, or was this sort of a unique opportunity for you?
I spoke to Russell, one of the founders of CPE, about this idea of bringing education to prison. And I said that it's a proactive, reactive situation where CPE is responding to something that is flawed in our social system. where guys like me who are high school graduates who get somewhat lengthy sentences that can be argued as an injustice to some extent. But the fact that I had to go to prison to get into college, and it just, it seems that there's a reactionary response there where CPE is responding to something that is systemically been actually caused. Like it's a flaw in the system. So it's a systemic flaw. Just to make clear what I'm saying. It's a systemic flaw that CPE is responding to, taking a proactive stance, but it's still a reactionary response.
Mm-hmm. And that systemic flaw that you're talking about, do you see that as a flaw in the educational system, or is it even bigger than that? Is it some sort of collection of social structures, or how would you describe what the systemic flaw is that we need to work on ideally?
I would say the systemic flaw starts economically, meaning Connecticut, just because that's where we are, that's where I'm from. Connecticut spends an average, close to $36,000 for the incarceration of each inmate, and it spends, I would say, somewhere a lot less, maybe less than half of that money is spent on the education for each student. So there's an economic systemic flaw on how state funds is being appropriated to these agencies and these facilities and all of these things that are funded by the state. So if anything, to start with, I would say it's an economic flaw on how money is spent, taxpayer money.
Mm-hmm. So what were your expectations of college before you started in prison? When you thought about college, what did you think it would be, and then how did CPE compare to that?
College, I only had an understanding of college based on what I seen on TV. I've never been to college, so I've never went to college parties. So I've always felt competent to handle college. I always wanted to go at some point in my life, but just my lifestyle will remove me from those thoughts. So what CPE did was it brought me back into a pattern of thought that was more consistent with education and college and using some of my natural gifts to survive and basically find a means of living, like speaking and writing and just thinking.
So you've mentioned already a bunch of different reasons that you wanted to get involved, like providing a means of living or learning to speak or write more differently. What do you think are the main benefits of CPE, of this educational program in prison? And did it end up matching up with what you were looking for when you went into it?
Absolutely. I think the primary benefit is what in sociology is called class consciousness. Is basically where, due to the information, the higher education being provided by CPE, prisoners have an opportunity to come into a class consciousness where they're able to understand their disposition in the system and how the system played a role in their disposition, how they're going to overcome that disposition. So CPE is providing information that more or less will bring about an awareness to guys that are incarcerated on how to overcome the challenges they face in society.
Wow, yeah, that's great that it's doing that. Yeah, I know. I read, and I heard when I was in prison, I heard you deliver your political prisoner speech when you were practicing, and then I was reading it over recently too. And I think that's a really interesting concept. I think it's such a brilliant idea, the way that you laid it out there. I'm interested if you could say a little bit about that too. And I'm going to hopefully film your talk that you give, so you'll be able to elaborate more. But yeah, this concept of the political prisoner, can you explain what you mean by that and how you came to that?
Well, the concept is the new political prisoner. Basically, what I was trying to do was bring about the class consciousness or form a collective identity for CPE students. Because what from my understanding, what is done, there's a form of oppression that resides in prison, particularly surrounding education. So prisoners are educationally oppressed. In order to overcome any form of oppression, as a group, individuals need a collective identity. So what I was trying to do was provide a collective identity for the CPE students, because you have a group of prisoners who come from different backgrounds, different lifestyles, sometimes different states. And there can be, what happens is, there can be an identity crisis that takes place once you come in contact with higher education, or the information, particularly of the liberal arts, because there's so much that's incorporated into the material. So what I saw was my personal experience. Who I thought I was in prison was possibly conflicting with what the information was given to me on a personal level. Like, meaning, just to clarify myself, I'm saying that CPE's system of providing education to guys in prison will cause an individual who has somewhat of an identity complexity to go through a transformation where they themselves may be unsure of who they are, or they may find themselves through the education. So the new political prisoner is someone, a prisoner, a man or a woman incarcerated, who has become politically awakened due to higher education. So now they understand how the system, the social system, how the political system, the economic system plays a role in their disposition. Things that they possibly couldn't mentally see without the higher education.
Mm-hmm. And what was it about the Wesleyan classes that offered you this chance to, it sounds like a personal, very personal reflection, but also a much larger systemic and political reflection. What do you think it was about the classes that did that when you didn't get that same sort of political push or insight in classes in high school or before prison? How was it different for you?
Maybe it's just something natural. I mean, just the whole me. I just have a natural liking of political things. I mean, just for an example, the end of the Civil War, 1865. 1866, you have the establishment of the Ku Klux Klan, an American terrorist organization whose primary goal was to stop blacks from being elected and participate in an election process. You have several different political things that took place, like the Jim Crow laws. There's so many different political things that obviously were put into place to deter a group of people from progressing in society. Then you have to understand that your disposition from the beginning was political. So that's when I knew this, because I came in contact with the information of these things, and then it made me realize that my disposition was more political, not trying to remove myself from responsibility for my actions, but just to have an understanding of the larger picture.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that whole history. I was just reading. I don't know have you heard of Michelle Alexander?
Yes.
And yeah, I was reading
the new Jim
Crow.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a very interesting way of sort of taking that history and moving it into what our present situation is, and showing how it's still very linked, and there's still this
yes.
sort of, now the prison system has become this kind of legalized form of discrimination in
yes.
the same ways that it used to be. And so I don't know if maybe you want to speak to that a little. What this is sort of a kind of broader theoretical question, but what purpose do you think the prison system is currently serving in this country, and do you think it is tied to that history?
In this country right now, the prison system has turned into a business. Prison, for one, is a theory. And the theory was that if you punish people who deviate from social norms, that the rest of society...
1 second, maybe we should wait for this siren so you can hear what you're saying.
That happens a lot here. Cars and cops flying by.
Yeah.
It's crazy, yeah.
The cop sirens would be a great effect.
Yeah, you're right. That's kind of a nice background. All right, so maybe you can just repeat again the prison system.
The prison system, first of all, was a theory, and it began as punish a small group of the population for their violation of social norms, and the rest of society will learn from their punishment. But what we have in America particularly is that the incarceration rate continues to increase. So maybe imprisonment as a theory has proven false. It doesn't work. Particularly recidivism rates. You have the same individuals who commit the same crimes, who become persistent offenders. So I see prison, particularly in Connecticut, as a business. And the thing is, when you say, well, if there's business going on, why would you take it personal? Well, because they are turning your personal life into their business by keeping you within the system. So it's hard not to take something that's set up as a business personal, because it's your life that has become their business.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's probably a really interesting place to reflect from, that it's your personal life and something that you've actually experienced and you've lived through, and then you also have this much broader sort of understanding of what's at work there, which I think you articulate really well. So maybe I'll ask one more sort of broader theoretical question and then get into more specifics about CPE and some more personal experiences that you've had with that. I don't know how we're doing on time here. So part of what I'm looking at in my thesis work is the connection between education and incarceration, and sort of this link between schools and prisons. And I don't know if you've heard of the school to prison pipeline.
Yep.
So that's one kind of intersection, and then I'm looking at sort of schools inside of prisons as another kind of intersection in ways that the two institutions interact. So I don't know if you have any sense of, like, what do you think the connection between schools and prisons is in this country, and how do you think that like, have you seen any examples in your own experience or any experiences of people that you know of how education and incarceration kind of work together or are interacting in some way?
I believe that education can provide a foundation to deter individuals from making choices in their own personal lives that would cause them to be incarcerated. The connection is obvious. Once again, it goes back to something financial. The funding, there's not enough funding spent, and particularly in Connecticut, on the school system. But not only that, to contradict that, Connecticut has spent a lot of money on the school system, and it still hasn't helped the situation with incarceration rates and juvenile delinquency. So you can't just push money into a system and expect things to change. So maybe it's the people who are in charge of running our school systems that are not actually fulfilling the duties as may be expected to justify the amount of money that the government or the state is spending on those services. So maybe there needs to be an assessment of who's running the schools, and particularly they need to find individuals that are not just taking jobs as teachers for job security, but because they have a passion for people. Anything that's involved with the school system, that's the foundation for socialization of becoming an American citizen. You need people there who care about other people, who are passionate, and just who have a genuine concern for the student. And this can be the beginning of removing the situation that will cause individuals that lead, lifestyles that put them in prison. The connection to education in prison, prison has been considered by some as a college, without CPE and all of these other, very good programming. But it's a college where you go and you learn about people, you learn about yourself. So you learn tools that you can't get from books. You get a deeper understanding of how people function. And meaning you just get a clear look at human behavior. If you have the intelligence and the awareness to pay attention to it, I mean, you have to have something there. I mean, otherwise it will go over your head. But prison itself is a place for educating without any programming. You're going to learn something regardless. But when you do put programs in there that give you the formal education along with the personal education you're giving yourself, the outcome can be great. It's definitely a synthesis of two worlds that can produce, have the potential to produce different perceptions and new realities for people who seem to be limited when it comes to thinking on how they look at themselves in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to ask a few more questions specifically about CP. I'm just going to check the shot and see. Is it?
Yeah, that's one. What's your net ID?
Net ID, I think ADR 11006. Capital C.
And then war.
Cold War 456.
Let me email you. I just typed it.
Can you read my handwriting?
Yeah, there's
Some of
one
them?
place that I put a line that I didn't know what
You didn't know what I said?
So just check it.
All right.
Email you from that.
I'm getting a slightly closer shot. So is this where you want to stay? Good there.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Cool. All right, that's good. So now just to get more of a sense of what the Center for Prison Education is like and how it functioned, can you describe a little bit your experience of going to class and maybe if you want to talk about a favorite class that you had or something that you liked about it or a specific story about that?
The experience of going to class, you kind of lose your awareness of where you are. You're no longer walking down a prison hallway. You're carrying books and you have thoughts in your mind that are outside of maybe the general prison thought atmosphere. You have left the institution of wherever you've been located on a prison level. You are now floating above the prison thought atmosphere. You're now walking down whatever university you want to walk down, whether it is Wesleyan, whether it is not. But you have the freedom to imagine yourself anywhere, and the education does that. It brings back it is a source of freedom. That's what the education does. And the experience of walking down the hallways, going to class. My favorite class would have to be political philosophy, because I'm very much interested in how ideas, theories, and concepts become realities, like capitalism. It was just an idea, and it became a reality that we're living out now. So, I'm just very interested in how ideas become realities, and I think political philosophy is very interesting when you have these brilliant men expressing their ideas, and they're trying to form arguments for what systems need to be established in the world, and their ideas actually come into existence. And I just find that amazing, that someone can write something as an idea for a system and it can actually come about. So political philosophy was just very intriguing for me.
Yeah. And what challenges did you face in your classes or through CPE, and how were you able to kind of deal with those?
Some of the challenges were, for one, there may have been just a misunderstanding on the amount of free time we have because we're incarcerated. Maybe sometimes the professors believe that we don't have anything to do with ourselves, but we get visits, we eat, we work out, we recreate, we use the phone, we watch TV. So there's so many things we can do with our time, and maybe it seemed at one point certain professors assigned an excess amount of material to do in a short period of time. So that was somewhat of a challenge. Also, on a personal level, a challenge for me was I was always making these connections between the course material. I was taking a molecular biology or a biology course with one professor, and I'm taking a political science course with another professor. And we're talking about the human body, and then we're talking about the governmental body. And I'm making all of these connections. And I tried to synthesize the material in my work, and the professors didn't like that. So they wanted me to stick to the course material that they were teaching me. So, but if you look at professionals, when they're expressing and they want to show their intelligence and their competence and their ability, they synthesize information. They use different languages, they use different disciplines, and that's what I was trying to do, show my competence by being able to synthesize different disciplines to make a point.
Yeah, definitely. I think the interdisciplinary connections can be some of the most interesting ones. Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot of thinking on your own outside of classes and figuring out how they all connect, which is really cool. And what kind of relationship developed between Wesleyan professors and the prisoners, or Wesleyan students and the prisoners? How did those connections work out, and what did you think you got from those?
The connections or the relationships were professional initially, but I think that over time they became more informal, and the relationships that we have with the professors, which I believe to be mutual, if anything, we have a genuine respect for each other, and the respect is based off of thinking. The professors respect the prisoners for their ability to just cogitate and grasp certain information. And likewise, the prisoners respect the professors for providing the opportunity and coming in there blind to the situation and not being judgmental and being open and minded enough to actually believe that the prisoners can handle the course material on that level.
Mm-hmm. And what about with your classmates? What kind of a connection did you develop with the classmates, and how did that maybe change the way that you were relating to people in the prison?
Yeah, we became a subgroup in prison. You know, we were the prisoners who were in college, and we had our own little subgroup, and it actually helped us. We probably formed relationships that probably would have never been formed. You have individuals coming from different religions, like I said before, different backgrounds, different lifestyles, different criminal histories. And particularly the emphasis in prison is segregation. Not only is the prison creating ways to segregate us, we find other ways to segregate ourselves, particularly on the dialect you speak when you use your slang. And that's how we identify, we meaning people from the urban community, mainly Black and Hispanic males. We identify each other based on the dialect of slang you use, and then we can identify what area of Connecticut you come from. So, you know, it was just interesting to have different guys speaking different dialects of slang, coming together from different areas and forming a subgroup that was just founded on something positive and not something negative like an actual gang. This was a positive coming together for us as prisoners.
And do you think that the impact of that, of having this subgroup, also sort of impacted other areas of the prison? Like, did you see the information being distributed more widely, or people seeing what you were doing and reacting to it in certain ways? Did it kind of change the culture of the prison at all, you think?
Absolutely. Seeing other prisoners carry books, go to school, have that discipline, that persistence, that drive to actually choose a different path on what they choose to do with their time, can cause, like I said, an identity crisis, a mass identity crisis, because it makes the prison population rethink who they are. And that's what I think. The information is that powerful. It will make you think twice, 3 times about what ego you have created prior to prison. That ego is going to be challenged, because now you start to see yourself as a different person. You know.
Yeah, that's powerful. Is there any particular anecdote that comes to mind? Any story that you might want to share about, I don't know, a classroom experience or a professor or a student or anything that, I don't know, that captures your experience? Or
I mean, in a positive light or a negative light? I mean, there's so many experiences. I mean, what do you want me to speak on? Like, I mean, is there something that was really like joyful, or I mean, that I took with me? I mean, because we're talking about prison, right. So I mean, there's a plethora of negative situations I could bring into the picture. But if we're talking about something positive, I would say a highlight of the CPE experience in Cheshire would be the ceremony, the commemoration ceremony, particularly me giving my speech. The funny thing about it is that I was somewhat nervous. I was nervous, but I felt natural being up there. Like, I didn't feel like I was doing something out of my element. And I was just really surprised by the response I got from COs, correctional officers, and professors. And it was just like, now in the eyes of the people in the prison authority, I was no longer who I once was, which is the motto of the DOC school district, Unified School District 1. I am not what I once was. And that's amazing that once I gave my speech at this commemoration ceremony, whatever image or whatever identity they had of me disappeared. And this is what happens on a personal level. So, that's what I'm saying. It's that powerful. You can become a different person.
Yeah, definitely. And how did your involvement with CPE influence your plans after being released? Obviously you're still continuing with education, and maybe you can speak about that a little, but did you feel like while you were in CPE it was changing the way you were thinking about what you would do after you got out, or it helped prepare you for your future academic or career or personal pursuits in any way?
Yeah, right now we're in the University of Connecticut, because I got in the University of Connecticut, but once again it goes into that persistence. You have to have that persistence, and that's how I was able to finish high school. And now I'm in UConn. I go to the University of Connecticut, and I'm trying to actually be more than just a student. I want to be an example. I want to embody pure possibility. And that's my goal. And what CPE did for me, it made me realize the potential power that I had as an individual who was going back into society. And I saw myself as more than just a guy in prison who came in contact with some college material. It wasn't that. I became like a revolutionary leader. Like, I'm changing perceptions. And when you're causing drastic changes of thought, it's revolutionary. And that's how I saw myself, and that's how I feel. I feel like I'm fighting. I'm fighting something, a war against negative perceptions about guys that go to prison. And I have to contradict it. I have to contradict the original perception of what a guy who goes to prison looks like, what he does with his time, and what he does after he leaves prison.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about your experience of education since prison. What is it like being here, and what was the application process like? And I don't know, how do you feel being a student at this university now on the outside?
It was very challenging, to to be honest. It was challenging. It's not easy to, it's easy to give up. It's not easy to stay passionate about school once you get out of prison. So you have to have a love for education in general. You have to want more out of your own life, and you have to want more from society. You have to want more, and that's what I wanted. So the process itself was challenging. I had help from Lexi, Alexis 30. She helped me very much on a daily basis, and without Lexi, honestly, I probably wouldn't have got in because I needed help. And it's just, I had to have someone believe in me, and Lexi believed in me. And that's what really made me realize like that I could do what I was trying to do, which was get into UConn and continue my schooling after prison. Being here is very much personally challenging on a mental level because I feel like I have a secret identity that nobody knows, and I'm just blending into the crowd. And to an extent, it's hard not to feel that now my prison education, I have a 5-year degree from Cheshire, you know, and all of these other prisons, like I've graduated from a college that you can't get into. Not that you want to go to the prison system as a form of college, but that type of background makes you feel advanced because there's nothing more powerful than experience. You can learn everything you want from a book, but if you lack experience, then the material doesn't hold as much weight. So I feel like I have 5 years of education, experiential education, that these students do not have. I don't know what they all been through, but it's very much unlikely that they've been to prison for 5 years. So it gives me that extra confidence I need in here because I have disadvantages.
Yeah, that must be a really interesting and complicated place to be, that something that you feel like has taught you so much and actually really changed the way you thought about everything is something that's so stigmatized on the outside that people think is a bad thing that would, I don't know, be something that would prevent you from getting a job or make all these obstacles for you. But also, I like that you say that it's like a college in and of itself. You know, you've had all these years of experience that other people haven't had that probably help you in a lot of ways to figure out sort of where you're going from here. Are there, and maybe, I don't know, we're probably hitting a time, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but maybe you can talk just a little bit, I'm sure you could talk a lot about it, about the reentry process and what it was like and what the biggest obstacles you faced were in this process of getting out of prison.
The biggest obstacle, self-adjustment for one. You just adjust yourself. You realize that you no longer are in the same environment. You're no longer in an artificial environment. You're back in the real world. And the first step would be to figure out what you want out of life. And don't limit yourself. Like, do not limit yourself to the possibilities. So the adjustments are always just personal. They're personal adjustments. Once you make that personal adjustment, everything else falls into place. You have to understand who you are now, you know, coming out of that situation, and you have to really figure out what you want out of life, you know, immediately. And that's what I believe the education in prison does. It can help guys in prison figure out what they want to do with their life. They can decide, you know, how they want to live the next half of their life, the next portion of their life, the next 7 to 10, maybe 20 years of their life. So I had that time to think, and now I'm making that progress towards how I want to live my life. And in order to get to certain places, I need credentials, educational credentials, and I'm getting them here in UConn.
And when you look to your future, what do you hope to see? Do you have long-term visions of where you want to go or where you see yourself?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's the identity crisis doesn't stop. It's a constant battle. It's serious. Because being back out of prison, I really cannot ignore what I see I can't forget what I know. So I have to just maintain this image in my head of myself in a positive light as a professional in the legitimate world. Particularly, I have interest in music, business. I have my own music company, Cream Company LLC, which I started in prison. And I plan to just do something that involves music, where through the music I'm making political statements. So I'm going to use the media as a tool to educate through music, one of the most powerful resources we have in society right now. And I feel like music is not being used enough for a positive benefit for society, and that you can send political messages, you can educate through music. And I choose to take my education, I'm going to educate myself and incorporate it in my music and then promote it and try to bring about political awareness. These things that took place that I had to go to prison to get, I'm going to give you in a song.
That's really cool. Would love to hear some of what you're working on. So do you think, after all this experience, do you think that the Wesleyan model of prison education is something that could be replicated in other places, or should be replicated or used as an example for programs?
Yes. But to be honest, it's a hard process. It's very challenging. You have to have passionate people. The people you have who are going to establish these CPE-like programs in other places, they have to be as passionate as the people who work for CPE and the people who come from Wesleyan. Wesleyan faculty, they just have a passion for people, have a passion for learning. They're very open-minded, and they take their work serious. And if you have people like that, sure, it can work. But if you just are placing programs in places without making a thorough assessment of who's putting these programs in place, then it can be a disaster. But I definitely believe in similar programming in other places, in Connecticut, outside of Connecticut, all around the United States. It's possible.
Yeah, and you talk about these passionate individuals. What do you think that Wesleyan professors or students get out of this experience? How do you think it's valuable to them to be going into the prison and teaching these classes or running the program?
I think that they get an education that they wouldn't be able to get, that they were basically removed from in society. Now they have they come in contact with an education of people that they couldn't get by going to an actual college. So now they're in prison, and what they're getting is an experiential education about people. They have now a change of perception. That's what they're getting out of it. The experience of dealing with guys in prison and teaching them the course material may change their perception on what a college student is, or who has the potential to be a college student, or maybe thoughts on their own topics that they've been discussing for years. So it's just a cram of new perspectives that's being given to the professor that they can take away and keep.
Yeah, that's so accurate. I definitely felt like when I was even just involved with the college prep workshops, it was such a different kind of education, and so important to be learning in that way. Yeah, all right, well, that's basically all I have to ask. Is there anything you feel like I missed, or anything else you want to add? Or Lexi, I don't know if you have any other questions.
Not really. I mean, if anything, I would just want to say that prison needs to be looked at on a basis of, 1, how money is being spent, 2, what type of programming is being offered, and 3, you want to take a look at what's working and what's not working. That's the problem. And there's too much programming that is not benefiting anybody. So CPE is a beneficial program. So maybe you should cut down on some of the other programs and expand programs that are working. It's almost common sense. So I'm just saying that that right there, I'll leave it on that note, that there needs to be an assessment of prison programming, particularly on what's working and what's not working. And when you do that, I think then you can make changes in recidivism rates, incarceration rates, and eventually the rate of crime in Connecticut will drop because there's adequate programming that's in place to help guys when they go to the system.
Yeah, that raises an interesting point, actually. You say the rate of crime in Connecticut will drop. What benefits do you think prison education has outside of just the individuals involved? How do you think it influences, like, I don't know, whether it's through family members or on their return, their communities? Do you think it has sort of broader benefits other than just this personal transformation?
Yeah, I mean, the individual who in prison becomes educated through programs like CPE, and they go back to society. The people who they know, their family members, their community, they only have an understanding of who that person was prior to going to prison. When they're released and they're speaking and moving and acting in different manners, this can basically have an influence on their own community, their own family members, and people who see them and say, wow, that person has changed. So what it does is it can galvanize change. You know, one individual can change not just how people look at prison and what prison can do for someone, but just look at a person who's actually changed when going to prison, because the story always is that when you go to prison, you're going to do this. When you come out, you're going to do this. So it's just back again. It's just a change of perception.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was a really comprehensive and really, really interesting to hear your thoughts. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I do. I want to know what you really think about what I've been saying today. Where your interest really comes from, and how do you see a person like me? Like, in what light do you see me in? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what type of understanding do you have of what I'm doing, what I'm saying, and like, what does this experience mean to you?
Yeah, that's a lot. Well, I think, I was nervous to come to this interview not because of you, but just because I think sometimes, like, coming across as someone who's like studying or researching from the outside puts you in a difficult position, because I don't want you to feel like I'm like using you as a project, you know, because this is your life. So yeah. I think that was what I was thinking about as something that hopefully this process can be valuable to you, and also to the Center for Prison Education also. And I don't know, my interest comes just from, like you said, from being involved. Like, from the first time I started going into Cheshire and going into those college prep classes, it was just so clear that this was a whole community of really brilliant individuals that just didn't have the same access. And I think you can't experience that and not be changed by it, even on the Wesleyan end. You know, it's on your end, obviously you're experiencing all these changes, but I think every single Wesleyan student who goes in there also experiences so much and is forced to reflect so much about, like, the privileges we have been given in our own lives and these larger systemic systems that we study. I mean, we study all the time at Wesleyan, you know, issues of racism and classism and systemic inequality and education and this sort of political perspective that you have, but we study it in such a removed way. You know, we study it because we're reading books about it, and we study it because we have the privilege to be able to sit and think about it, you know, and just like relax in a dorm room and be like, wow, the system is so messed up, but we don't study it in the same way that you studied it with your life, you know. It's not like the same type of experience. So I think for me in particular, it just has opened up a whole new way of thinking about, like, these systems that are in place, which is why I wanted to study. And, you know, I'm really interested in education, and I want to be a teacher or to be involved in some way, and I don't know where exactly I'll fit into any of these educational structures, but I think that interest led me to this, you know, thought about how are prisons related to schools, and how are these two systems so involved with each other that it really is sort of this larger system of control that's in place, that it's not just, you know, it's not just by accident that people end up in certain tracks that they're on, that it's really sort of dictated and structured with this whole legalized form of discrimination and form of social control. So I resonated with so much of what you were saying. I thought I could just tell there were certain things that you were saying. I was like, wow, it's a great soundbite. Like, I've been trying to articulate that for a long time, but I haven't been able to quite like put it that way. So yeah, so I really appreciated that. Anyway, I don't know if that helps you get a sense of where I'm coming
that's
from.
fine. That makes me see that you understand that, you know, other people, you're thinking like people are thinking alike. You come from a different background than me, but we obviously share some thoughts on larger topics regarding systems and society and prison and education. So that's cool, you know. I like that. I like the fact that it's interesting to me is that when I'm in class here at UConn, some of my own thoughts have already been expressed by these brilliant people, and I'm like, I've thought of that, you know, and I've just come back in contact with this information from established, renowned individuals, and I'm like, well, it really, like I said, it really causes serious changes on who you think you are as a person, you know, when you're thinking side by side with people who are established intellectuals.
Yeah.
And that's how I see you. You're an intellectual, and
Not established in any way.
I mean, you're on your way to being an established professional intellectual, but you're in school, you're a college student, but we can share the same, you know, we can share similar thought patterns about things in the world, and that makes me know that, okay, this is who I am. I am a college student, you know. So, I mean, it's great that we can make that connection.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's really great. Yeah, I see you as an established intellectual as well. So
You are established.
Put me anyway.
You are established.
But yeah.
You can't have a title define your establishment. Titles are just titles.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think. Yeah, definitely thought a lot about these issues, so it's cool to be able to hear you have very similar sort of thoughts. All right, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yep.
That was great.